Welcome, everybody, to Mormonism Live. I'm Bill Reel, joined by my co-host, Radio Free Mormon. And we've got a fun episode for you tonight. In Mormonism, we always tout the three witnesses, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer. And we say those three guys stick into their story, that they affirm that the Book of Mormon is, in fact, what it claims to be and what the church claims it to be.
Even though they left the church, they never denied their testimony. Who would do that unless it was true, Bill?
Yeah. As if only denying one's testimony would make something lack credibility. What if not only they had a testimony of the thing you want them to believe in, but they also had a testimony of a half dozen other things that would make their testimony much weaker? What if they believed
too much? Being credulous, perhaps.
Yeah, what if they believed other religious movements and other religious stories and other spiritual tales, and they believed the stories of others when those stories seem quite absurd? Well, tonight on Mormonism Live, we're going to jump into the untold story of Martin Harris. And anything from you before we jump into this, RFM?
Just this. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, 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 dun. All right, here we go. So first off, let me start with Martin Harris. There's the thumbnail. Martin Harris, the untold story. And I wanted to start with outside of Mormonism, essentially a little bit of background on Martin that gives some shape to his story. I wanted to give folks a bit of a biography, but not exactly, more connected to the things that have to do with Mormonism. And Martin Harris was born in 1783. He died in 1875. Martin Harris was born in 1783, was a prosperous Palmyra farmer. Long before Mormonism, he had acquired a handsome property, and that was the quote about the property he had. And we'll see pictures of that tonight, and it is quite a handsome property. And
that's what I call it, handsome.
Yeah, we'll see another handsome tonight too, and we'll point it out to the audience when we get there. But and so he acquired a handsome property, was known locally as an honorable and upright man. Neighbors praised him as obliging and benevolent. Those are nice words to have assigned to your name. Even critics admitted he was an honest, worthy citizen, and I don't think anybody's doubting that. He had belonged to many denominations, Quaker, Methodist, Baptist, etc., and was open to supernatural ideas. So much.
Can I just say something here, Bill?
Please.
Before I joined the church, which was when I was 18, so much younger than I think Martin Harris when he became a Mormon, you know how many churches I belonged to?
0.
Yes. I have belonged to one church in my entire life, and that is the Mormon church. He seems to be different.
Yeah. What is David Alexander? David Alexander's joined a number of churches.
Yes. The yellow deli guy.
And I think that says something. And again, no offense to anybody in our audience who's been part of a bunch of churches, but I think there is a certain type of person who's trying to find the thing. And they go out and they're willing to try one thing and leave it and try another and leave it and keep going till they find the thing that they think they're looking for. And I think oftentimes maybe never find it.
Yeah, and that's true. And different people are different. But it just seems to me that when you're talking about religion, which is kind of a big deal and a commitment, at least if you're a spiritual person and earnestly seeking for the truth, that usually you don't join until you're pretty sure that this is the right one. You know, you do your investigation up front. And so what this seems to say to me a little more is hot and cold, hot and cold.
Yeah, he doesn't stick it out with any one thing. He gets disenfranchised at some point and often pretty quickly. He's open to supernatural ideas, so much so that an acquaintance.
That's the understatement of the year. Martin Harris is open to supernatural ideas.
We'll see some of that tonight.
He's wide open.
So much so that an acquaintance called him a monomaniac, prone to religious enthusiasm. Others said he was easily overbalanced by marvels and even joked that he was a great man for seeing spooks. So that's
he not only has the front door wide open, he's got the red carpet rolled out for supernatural ideas.
And in short, Harris combines strong, honest character with an intense, sometimes erratic, and we'll see that tonight, religious imagination. This is a image of him that's been doctored up to give it color. The photograph was actually black and white, but it is a real photograph of Martin Harris, and this is a modern rendition with color added, sort of like the original Wizard of Oz when they first had Technicolor, and you exit the beginning of the movie from the black and white, and suddenly in the land of Oz, there's color everywhere. Well, with Martin Harris, we're going to see a colorful person.
I think Ted Turner did that photograph for us.
It looked a little bit.
That's an old joke. Anybody get that joke?
Ted is
not
old.
As old as the Wizard of Oz.
And then I want to talk for a moment about meeting Joseph Smith. And this source is something I found this morning. I added a few slides later on, but we'll at least get familiar with it here. This is called Tiffany's Monthly. It's an investigation of the science of, let's see what that says here. Science of mind. So investigation of the science of mind. That was the clearest image I could find of it. It was a really small image. So when I made it bigger, it was a little harder to read. But we'll see the very bottom there is a cutout from that article. Harris first heard about the golden plates in 1827 when Lucy Mack Smith, that's Joseph Smith's mother, of course, asked him to visit. He was skeptical at first. Harris later said he assumed that Joseph and his money-digging friends had merely found an old brass kettle.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Are you reading something that's supposed to be on the stage?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, if you ever think that's happening, go ahead and flip that. I've got a second monitor with another one up so I can read it a little closer.
Okay.
So anyway, Harris later said that he assumed Joseph and his money-digging friends had merely found an old brass kettle, but Joseph's earnestness and scripture studies impressed him. In early 1828, Harris gave Joseph a free $50 in silver to support the translation, explicitly declaring, quote, "I give this to you to do the Lord's work." Joseph even recorded Harris's promise, and Harris said, quote, "If the Lord will show me that it is his work, you can have all the money you want," unquote. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second and just note, Martin Harris is known to the community to be quite wealthy in comparison to most others in the community. And he tells Smith that if you can convince me that this is the Lord's work, you can have all of my money.
Mm-hmm. Is that a challenge, Scar?
Yeah. If you're Joseph Smith, you can sense right away, if you're going to start with someone to try to make them the fool, Martin Harris is as good of a person as any.
Maybe I could find a pin or something on the ground while I have my face in my hat. Maybe that would impress him to give me money.
Yeah, we'll see that story here shortly. That night, Harris prayed and later reported that the Lord showed me that it was his work by a still small voice.
So still, so small.
Which
means
means
the stiller and smaller it is, the more sure you can be that it's of God.
Yeah, and it also becomes something that would be indiscernible from anything else that isn't from God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Indiscernible from a fraud. By his still small voice in his soul, he felt bound by covenant to help bring forth the translation. Harris then acted on that vow, and he became Joseph's scribe and financier. And that monthly periodical from Tiffany's Monthly, that is a cutout there down below, and it's just essentially showing you some of the parts of the data that I showed you above. I will include as soon as the show ends tonight, I will add the resources from tonight's show into the show notes. And if anybody wants to go read it, it's actually a decent article in length. And I think there's quite a few early stories from the restoration in there. We'll see some of those here in a little bit.
You know something, Bill? One thing I really appreciate about you amongst so many is that you really do a lot of work to put those links up there for folks so they can look at the documents that you're covering and we're covering on their own and at their leisure, and look before and after what it is, and maybe, read the whole thing. I think that's incredible. I know it's a lot of extra work for you, but I think that's really great for the audience.
Yeah, it's important to me, RFM, because we are in a business where what we do, people criticize us from the inside. They want to believe, they've got confirmation bias, they want the church to be true, and they are taught on the front end, the moment they encounter us, to disbelieve us, to think that we're the liars, The church is the truth tellers. And what I always want to demonstrate in these historical dives is that if you go to the documents, you'll see that we are the truth tellers. We're the ones that are telling you all the data. We're giving you enough information to make informed decisions, and you can go chase it down, read all the documents, and make up your own mind. I want you to know both sides. I want you to know what places I heard things and saw things. I don't want to conceal podcasters' names. I don't want to conceal documents. I don't want to hide history. I want it out there. And so I think it's a big deal. Okay. Anton in Mortgaging the Farm. So in 1828, Harris travels to New York City with a manuscript, the characters from the plate. Let me say that again. He travels to New York City with the manuscript characters from the plates. And we all have seen a document that's at least purported to be the Anton transcript. I was going to include it here, but I wanted to have these pictures on here. Contemporary sources and later historians record that Harris showed these to experts. There was a Samuel Mitchell. There's a professor, Charles Anton. Everyone familiar with Mormonism knows these stories. Richard Bennett is one of those scholars, historians who notes this encounter. Harris recalled that Anton first authenticated the characters, but upon learning that they came from a sealed book revealed by an angel, tore up a promised certificate of authenticity, saying, I cannot read a sealed book. Now I'm going to go back to the previous slide because I think it's in this one. Maybe it's not. I thought it was in here. Somewhere it mentions the languages that things were in. And I thought it was that one. I'm just going to go check here. Oh yeah, let me put something else up on the screen.
Yeah, it's still to come, I think.
Yeah, it is, but it's important for this conversation. So I'm going to put this up and view here, slideshow. Take that down and put this up. So we'll just read this for just a second. On the right-hand side, that middle section that's got the red, Mr. Harris says Joseph Smith Jr. found at Palmyra, New York, on the 22nd day of September, 1827, the plates of gold upon which was recorded Arabic, Chaldaic, is that how you say that? Syriac?
Chaldaic. It's Babylonian.
Chaldaic, Syriac, and Egyptian. The Book of Life or the Book of Mormon. Now, two things. We'll get to this when we talk about it later, but I thought it was interesting that the Book of Mormon here has a separate name as the Book of Life. I've never heard that before. I thought that was intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I have talked about these languages before, so I'm going to put the other one back up. Yeah. You and I have talked about these languages before, the Arabic, Chaldaic, Syriac, and Egyptian. I think for the most part, those are found in Adam Clark's commentary. It makes sense to me that Joseph Smith, again, we have the Anton transcript, but we're not certain that's actually the transcript that was taken, Charles Anton. It's purported to be, but there is reason to doubt that. And it occurs to me that what Smith could have
mainly because the one that we have today is completely different from the way that Charles Anton describes it.
Yes.
That was one of the forgeries that Hoffman was doing.
Yes. And it occurs to me that what Smith could have easily have done was taken things that he found in his culture, his environment, such as characters from Adam Clark's commentary. And you had talked about this in a previous episode when we mentioned this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a piece of paper with those symbols on it, takes it to Charles Anton. Anton looks at that and does authenticate that those are, in fact, Arabic, Chaldaic, Syriac, Egyptian symbols.
Mm-hmm.
But when Martin then proceeds to tell him what that means, which is that some boy in Palmyra, New York, is translating gold plates into English language and giving us modern day scripture, it would then occur to him that this is absurd, and it would make perfect sense for him to then tear up the document the document that he gave Martin Harris to say that this, because again, when we talked about this before, and I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but when he talked about this before, it was noted that Martin didn't start off telling him what was going on. Martin started off with just giving him the paper and asking him his opinion. And he verifies that these are ancient characters of ancient languages. And then it's that Martin, and because the way the narrative's told, it's then that Martin tells him what's going on. And it's that reason why Anton then tears up the document. And I just want the audience to understand that the Book of Mormon makes little sense in being these 4 languages included.
That's the weird thing, isn't it? That's one of the weird things. Hebrew, I get. Egyptian, I get, because they're both mentioned in the first chapter of First Nephi, right?
Right.
The language of the Egyptians and the learning of the Jews, either that or vice versa. But it makes reference to both of them. But what is this? What, Chaldaic? Syriac? What is all this stuff doing in there? Is my question. And it's like, it's as if Martin Harris never stopped to ask himself why they would be there on these plates. It's like, wow, he verified that they are an ancient language, and therefore he sort of skipped that connecting link about why they should be on these gold plates. Knowing what actually happened is a tricky business. We've got different accounts, as you know, even though there's only 2 people involved, really. And the 1838 account that we have in church history, which is the one that we're familiar with, was written by Joseph Smith after Martin Harris had left the church, I believe, earlier that year. So there's all sorts of questions as to the details of that and how accurately they reflect even what Martin Harris may have told Joseph Smith. But here, at least, we have something where some years later, but he's telling his own story about what happened. And it's interesting that in his own story, now Martin Harris includes the idea as if he didn't get it from Professor Anton, the languages that were on the plates. You see what I mean? I mean, now that becomes part of his story. As if what he knew them, he wouldn't have known them, as if Joseph Smith knew what they were.
Yes. And it doesn't fit. And I find this a lot. One of the things that I think all of us had to do, or maybe still have some things to do with this, but we leave Mormonism, and Mormonism shaped every story that we hear in the way that it wanted us to hear them. So for instance, when Josiah Stoll sees a corner of what is supposed to be the plates wrapped up and it's green, the story is shaped and told in such a way that you see Josiah Stoll as testifying that the plates are there, that he saw them. But if you step back and you go, forget the way Mormonism tells the story. If I just look at the facts, what is the best way to see this? And we see this again with this story, with the Charles Anton account. We can make much better sense of this story if we look at this from Charles Anton's point of view. And we assume that whatever document he came in did have ancient script on it, but it's not the Book of Mormon. And then the story makes a lot more sense. The 116 lost pages, when you step away from Mormonism's narrative and you step out and go, what is Joseph Smith trying to cover up? What's he trying to hide? What's he trying to keep from happening? The story makes a whole lot more sense. And I think that tool is really useful when you're deconstructing Mormonism and you're trying to figure out what really happened, is to forget what Mormonism told you for a moment, look at the story as an outsider, and try to figure out how you would see the events unfolding based on the details and the facts from a critical perspective. And so many times the story just is more reasonable from that point of view.
Can I just add in here, just because I get excited about this stuff, is that a number of years ago, when you and I were going over sections 8 and 9 of the Doctrine and Covenants and really digging into them and really looking at what they were saying, as opposed to this veneer that, you know, we'd been taught all our lives in the church. And once I read those, and I know you had the same experience, but once I read those and I read them carefully, closely, and just allowed them to say what it was that they wanted to say, I realized that whether you like the tight translation theory of the Book of Mormon or whether you like the loose translation theory of the Book of Mormon, it is indisputable that according to those revelations received through Joseph Smith, that Joseph Smith believed that he could retranslate the lost 116 pages word for word. And that's as tight as it gets.
That's the claim that he makes. And it's only apologist, when something doesn't add up using that lens, do they come up with a workaround. But then that workaround violates the scriptures, the revelations, the things said by the prophets of old. Another example is that we all say gold is too heavy. It can't, the gold plates can't actually be made of gold. So the apologist comes in and goes, no one ever said it had to be gold. So hence it could just be the color of gold. Hence it could just be this ancient Mesoamerican metal alloy called Tembaga, when no one wants to acknowledge that Moroni himself told Joseph Smith that it was plates of gold. We have to deal with things as they are. We can't deal with things as we would like them to be.
Yes, and a little known thing about gold is that when it's exposed to oxygen, it turns green. That's accounting for why it was that Josiah Stoll saw a green corner.
Does it?
No, it doesn't at all.
I didn't think so.
No,
Okay.
copper does that. Gold will not.
Copper does, which might explain why the plates were green.
If that was metal, if that were metal and not stone, yes.
Yeah. Okay, back to this. So again, Anton first authenticated the characters, but upon learning that they came from a sealed book. So again, once he learns what's going on, then the ruse is up. Revealed by an angel, he tore up the promised certificate of authenticity, saying, I cannot read a sealed book. I'd love to know what the conversation really happened there, because I highly doubt he said it just like that.
What makes sense is he comes in, he asks very directly just about this language and what's written here. And he says, well, it looks like these are these languages. I can't tell you about the translation, And so he says, I'll write you a certificate. By the way, while I'm writing this out, so how'd you come by this? Well, how'd this other guy come by it? And so there were gold plates and there was an angel. And no, I don't think so. I'll be tearing that up now.
Yeah. I'm not going to have my name attached to this bullshit.
Yes. Nice try, but it has been ever since. And you have become an unwilling witness for the truth of the gospel over the centuries, Professor Anton.
Yeah. And of course, the church tells you the Martin Harris side of the story, and no one wants to tell you. I had to learn on my own, through my own wanting to research things, that Charles Anton had been interviewed more than once after the fact and had put his testimony down about what had happened that day. No one in the church ever wanted me to know what Charles Anton had thought or said.
Can I add something here that's coming to me as we're talking? Now, here you've got Charles Anton's side of the story, right? If Joseph Smith actually did copy those characters, they were real characters from really these different languages, okay? If he really did that, regardless of what the Book of Mormon would lead one to expect the languages in it would be, he's got more than that. Then, if Martin Harris goes to Professor Anton, hands him the stuff, and Professor Anton actually does say what I said, yeah, these are real characters from these different languages. I don't know about this translation. And then he finds out and then he tears it up. That's why Martin Harris would feel vindicated in going back home and mortgaging his farm, because Professor Anton told him that these characters were ancient languages.
What's really sad is that we don't have the original Anton transcript, because if there was a translation provided, certainly those symbols from those four languages would have meaning, and they wouldn't mean the sentence that Joseph Smith came up with for the Book of Mormon.
Would you say that again? I'm too astounded by what I just came up with, and I was thinking about that instead of what you were saying. I apologize. What were you saying, Bill?
I'm just saying that if there are four different languages on the Anton transcript that are supposed to compute to a sentence from the Book of Mormon,
that's weird.
Won't work. That won't work. If that had stayed in existence, we would have side-by-side characters that don't equal the translation, because those would have been actual Egyptian, Chaldaic, Syriac symbols that meant something, but they wouldn't have meant, and it came to pass, Lehi dwelt in the tent.
Very good. Yeah. So it would be a strange thing to have those as if this body of jumbled language characters meant something or was represented in any kind of translation.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good.
So shame on Anton for tearing it up. Well, I guess that was just a certificate, but we don't have the transcript today. I wish we did. Okay. I'm going to move on.
By the way, Bill, can I tell you why I think that's such a big deal?
Please.
If it's not clear, I want to make it so, because I want to try and remember this. This is the big selling point that Mormons use. I mean, I mentioned this in my missionary farewell, Bill. I mentioned this story about this encounter that he had with Anton. I probably knew about Anton's account by then, even though I'd been a member of the church for only less than a year and a half at that point. I was studious. But I knew about both the accounts. I got up there and I told it exactly the way, which is this, is that if it happened the way that Anton said it happened, then why did Martin Harris come home and mortgage his farm to the tune of $3,000 for Joseph Smith? Obviously, something happened that impressed him and made him think Joseph Smith was telling the truth. And I think this takes care of that. This answers that question. It shows that he would have believed that Joseph Smith could produce ancient script, because that's all that Professor Anton told him, at least under this scenario, under this theory. So it would both account for why it is that Anton tears it up, and also why Martin Harris leaves feeling vindicated and mortgages his farm. It takes away that proof from the Mormon apologist.
That these two interact for a brief moment. They're not sitting down and going over this with a fine-tooth comb. What Martin Harris comes in and then walks away getting is he gets Anton to say that these are ancient characters. Is that what you're saying? And that would have blown Martin away. How did Joseph Smith get ancient characters?
No kidding. I mean, this guy gets blown away by Joseph Smith recognizing that it's not his pet rock when he swaps it out.
He is.
You know what I mean? That he gets excited about that. He gets excited when Joseph Smith puts his face in a hat and feels around on the ground and finds this pin or this needle that he's lost. He'll get excited about that. He'll get really excited about this.
Yes. And in any case, Harris returned convinced enough to mortgage his farm for Joseph's cause, exactly as RFM pointed out. Harris would have come in with characters, walked out having an expert verify that those are in fact ancient characters, and that would have been enough to make him tickled pink, warm the cockles of his heart, and he would have gone back to Palmyra and did exactly that. By 1831, he had mortgaged his 151-acre farm for about $3,000, almost $100,000 in today's dollars, to pay for the Book of Mormon printing. And I want to show folks pictures of his house. Again, imagine this in 1830 when people are moving into the frontier and building log homes. And Martin Harris has this beautiful estate.
And that's really the house from back then?
That's the house from back then. Here's another picture of it.
Beautiful, yeah. Colonial.
Yeah, here's another one. And the sign there says Martin Harris Farm. Or Martin Harris Home, maybe one of the two, but it's a church site now. I've never been to it. Have you ever been to it?
No, I haven't. I'm guessing that if that does go back to 1828, and I have no reason to doubt it, that back part toward the camera is probably an addition.
Yeah, and I think that's the case.
And it might even be a visitor center.
Yeah. All right. So Book of Mormon witness. Harris became the third official witness of the Book of Mormon. Again, he would have been 1, 2, 3 with the guys, but he couldn't have a supernatural event occur. He walked away thinking he was the problem. And so after Whitmer and Cowdery had their experience, Harris becomes the third official witness of the Book of Mormon. That's because Mary Whitmer, hello, Mary, Moroni visited her. So she's an unofficial witness of the Book of Mormon. The three stated an angel had shown them the plates. As Lucy Mack Smith recorded, Harris himself declared after the visionary experience, I have also looked upon the plates and handled them with my hands and can testify of the same to the whole world. This language that he physically hefted and held the plates became central to his enduring testimony. After publication, Harris joined the new church and was baptized on the founding of the church, 6th of April, 1830.
I highlighted that because I just wanted to ask you, when did he handle the plates? That sounds like 8 witness stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe I'm off here in saying that, but there are other moments where he says he handled the plates. This is a real quote from him. So I know he hefts them because he says they weighed between 40 and 50 pounds. So he does handle the plates, although I think when he's saying this quote, he's reporting about them being inside of a cloth, held hidden by a cloth.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
have to sort of know each of these experiences that Martin has, because you're right. The three witness experience is a spiritual experience. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't Moroni like lay them down on a table and
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they don't get to touch those. Moroni turns them over, I think, for them. But it's just that if he's describing something that he is trying to communicate, I don't know how much any of this happened except within the mind's eye, Horatio. But he says, I have also looked upon the plates. That should be one thing. And handled them with my hands. If that's a totally different experience, then that's a different thing. And it should not be what? Thought that he's talking about one experience where he looked on the plates and handled them with his hands.
Yes, but this happens from time to time where multiple accounts are convoluted. So like what the church does today with the first vision, for instance, it now tries to tell a story where it incorporates all the first vision accounts into one cohesive story.
Mhm.
And I think this is what Martin is doing back then. He's combining what he would claim was a spiritual experience about being a witness with the physical experience of helping with the translation and hefting them. And he would want people to see that sort of as one and the same, because they are all different angles of the elephant. If you know the story that Elder Uchtdorf told in conference that's been used a million times before he did, with various blind people handling the elephant and each testifying to it looking a different way. I sort of see that here, where Martin wants people to combine what he can testify about in the physical experience during the translation and what he can testify about in the spiritual experience, and combine them into one testimony. But they really do have to be separated out.
Yeah, I think that's the five blind men from Hindustan or something like that. But what they're doing here with the first vision accounts and sewing them all together to make one narrative, they're just following well-worn tradition. Christmas. We tell a Christmas story that is a combination of the disparate nativity stories in Matthew and Luke. And they have all sorts of, they're not the same story at all. So what we do, what we've agreed to do is take these different stories, put them both together as if they're one story, while conveniently ignoring the parts that contradict. And then we just tell the one story. And I think that's what they're doing here, just with four visions instead of two nativity accounts.
Yeah, and Dan is saying that we've got that right. Exactly. The seeing and the handling were different experiences, even for the 8 witnesses.
Oh, even for the 8. Yeah. Well, that's important.
Yeah.
Isn't it great that Dan Vogel watches the show? I just
Yep.
feel cheered in my heart every time he makes an appearance on the screen.
Yes. And I think he's quite helpful to helping us sort things out at times. So thank you, Dan, for being in attendance. This language that he physically hefted and held the plates became central to his enduring testimony. After publication, Harris joined the new church, baptized 6th of April, 1830. We went over that. I wanted to say here really quick, Mormonism After Dark, Friday, October 31st. So this Friday
Just 2
is
days from now.
Yeah, it's a Halloween special. Folks, you can show up in your birthday suit if you want to.
No, you can't do that, actually.
But in order to come into the show, be in the studio, be brought onto screen, be able to share your ghost stories, scary stories, anything else you want to share around our Halloween special, you got to be in costume. And we're going to see how this goes. But I've got my costume. RFM's is ready to put on his. So, folks, we just like to encourage you, 8 p.m. Friday, if you're going to Mormonism After Dark and you want to come on the screen, and we would like as many of you as possible to come onto the screen.
And the idea is to come on and tell us a story.
Yeah.
A ghost story. Something scary, hopefully.
So please do that. Wear your costume, and we'll be happy to bring you on. So we're excited for Friday night show, and we'll see you then for that. All right. So now Martin's disillusionment. So these are several stories that go into how we would evaluate Martin Harris's credibility. And for a time, Harris's relationship with the church remained positive. But in 1837, 1838, the Kirtland Saints fractured amid financial schemes and disputes. We covered that top right-hand corner there, Kirtland Safety Society incompetence or scam. In late December 1837, the Kirtland High Council excommunicated 28 dissenters, including Harris. He had been a church trustee and even included with Sidney Rigdon and Warren Parrish in a splinter Church of Christ in Kirtland early in 1838. This began Harris's long period of estrangement. Now, I don't know if, I think it was just the Church of Christ. I don't know if they had the in Kirtland at the end of it, but the one source did have it like that. This began Harris's long period of estrangement. His fellowship severed. He spent years outside of the church and later the Brighamite church faction as well. That episode, I think, is phenomenal if you want to go back and listen to the Kirtland Safety Society episode. And so we run into certain historical moments that begin to then create doubt around Martin Harris's credibility as a witness. And now we're back to this Tiffany's Monthly. And if we are believers in Mormonism and in Martin Harris as a witness, then we should believe him when he speaks about Smith finding the plates with specific languages that seem contradictory to the truth of the Book of Mormon, and that it was by the stone that Smith found the plates rather than Moroni. And so I'll just, in fact, I'll ask you, I'll read the little one here, and then if you'll read the big one. But the little one says, he replied, this is again an interview with Martin Harris. He replied, Joseph had before this described the manner of his finding the plates. He found them by looking in the stone found in the well of Mason Chase. The family had likewise told me the same thing. Now, I want to note here, Martin Harris does this thing, and we'll see it, I think, in a later slide, but Martin Harris does this thing where he goes in to talk to the Smith family, and he asks them for a story about how Joseph came to have these plates. And the family tells him that Joseph dug a well on the Chase property, found a stone, and used that stone to find the gold plates. Then when Joseph comes home, Martin quickly grabs him, takes him outside so there's no family communicating with Joseph about what the conversation was. And Joseph is caught not having a chance to do that. And Joseph says the same thing. He tells the same story. I say this because when you and I learned church history, we learned that Joseph Smith was laying in his bed at night, and Moroni came to visit him 3 times in the night and once in the morning, and that it was Moroni who showed Joseph Smith where the plates were located. What Joseph's original story was to Martin Harris, at least, and it was such a stable story that both his family and Joseph both testified of the exact same account, separate from each other, was that Joseph found a rock digging the well on the Mason Chase property with Willard, finds the egg-shaped stone, and that's how he locates the plates. So I'll say that, and now I'll ask you if you don't mind reading this thing on the right.
Yeah, this is just so sad. This was the other shoe that we kind of knew was going to have to drop at some point. I mean, originally Moroni, the angel Moroni, was a guardian spirit, protecting the treasure, just like guardian spirits do. It's a big deal among guardian spirits
don't tell you where the treasure is. They're there to keep you from getting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Moroni was very effective at that for 4 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened at the end there, but he slipped up and Joseph Smith got the plates. But to find out that really that whole angel Moroni thing is all a later story where different, more supernatural folk magic elements are being overlaid with biblical kinds of ideas and angels and Urims and Thummims. So here's what it says. The following narration we took down from the lips of Martin Harris and read the same to him, excuse me.
Can I just
it was written? Yeah.
Just to drive the point home.
Yeah.
The original story that Joseph Smith brought to everyone was a treasure digging story. It wasn't a restoring scripture story. It's only once he has the plates and once he's in the middle of translation that he decides that this is going to be a spiritual story about bringing scripture forward. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, fine. What they're doing, the authors are trying to show that they were careful to make sure that they got the story down right from Martin Harris. They read the same to him after it was written. that we might be certain of giving his statement to the world. We made a journey to Ohio for the purpose of obtaining it in the latter part of January 1859. We did this that the world might have a connected account of the origin of Mormonism from the lips of one of the original witnesses, upon whose testimony it was first received. For it will be remembered that Martin Harris is one of the 3 witnesses selected to certify to the facts connected with the origin of that revelation. Now, here's this first part that you had already read earlier. Mr. Harris says, quote, Joseph Smith Jr., found at Palmyra, New York, on the 22nd day of September, 1827, the plates of gold upon which was recorded in Arabic, Chaldaic, Syriac, and Egyptian, the Book of Life or the Book of Mormon. So that's the date he found it. I was not with him at the time, but I had a revelation the summer before that God had a work for me to do. These plates were found at the north point of a hill 2 miles north of Manchester Village. Joseph had a stone which was dug from the well of Mason Chase 24 feet from the surface. In this stone, he could see many things to my certain knowledge. It was by means of this stone he first discovered these plates. Period. End of quote.
And I just want to know, what I read and what you read are 2 different parts of this interview. Martin goes on to say this twice.
I meant when several minutes ago when you were linking it up to that earlier story. But you're saying that this other part on the left of this slide at the bottom, that's a separate part from the same interview?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Martin, in 2 different occasions in the interview, wants the the person doing the interviewing to know clearly that it was through this rock that the plates were found. And then he, again, like I said, he goes on to then tell this story about the reason I know this is because I asked the family and they told me it was by the Willard Chase rock that Joseph Smith found where the plates were. And then when Joseph came home, I took him outside and he also told me it was by the means of this rock. So he had a consistent story.
See, Martin Harris does it again. He's like Inspector Clouseau, because he thinks that if he separates Joseph Smith from the family that he's just asked and gets the same story from Joseph Smith, and that means that it's true, as opposed to the more obvious conclusion, I would think, that Joseph Smith is the one who came up with the story in the first place and told his family that's what happened.
Yeah. And what Martin doesn't know is that he actually gets the testimony in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses that it was never Moroni that led Joseph Smith to the plates. It was the rock in the hat.
It was Agatha all along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. There's that. Now here's the one you love.
I love this one.
You want to read this one?
Okay. Is this from the same article?
This is also from that same I'm going to call it a magazine.
Monthly. Mm-hmm. In the first place, he told me of this stone. So this is Martin Harris talking about Joseph Smith. This is all his words. In the first place, Joseph Smith, told me of this stone and proposed to bind it on his eyes and run a race with me in the woods.
What the hell is that?
What it means is you can really see, he can see through the stone.
Yeah, blindfold me, but with the rock over my eyes.
Yeah, and I'll run you a race through the woods, apparently not hitting any trees. I don't think they actually did this, so it's hard to see, but I think that was the idea.
These are all parlor tricks. You and I could come up with a way that we could still see through whatever the blindfold is and make our way through the woods. And Joseph Smith is already faster than Martin Harris. That's the only thing he has to be assured of.
Yeah. He told me of this stone and proposed to bind it on his eyes and run a race with me in the woods. Apparently, Martin Harris didn't accept the proposal. Mm-hmm. He goes on, a few days after this, I was at the house of his father in Manchester, 2 miles south of Palmyra Village, and was picking my teeth with a pin while sitting on the bars. The pin caught in my teeth and dropped from my fingers into shavings and straw. I jumped from the bars and looked for it. Joseph and Northrop Sweet also did the same. We could not find it. I then took Joseph on surprise and said to him, take your stone I had never seen it and did not know I did not know that he had it with him. He had it in his pocket. He took it and placed it in his hat, the old white hat, and placed his face in his hat. I watched him closely to see that he did not look one side. He reached out his hand beyond me on the right and moved a little stick. And there I saw the pin, which he picked up and gave to me. I know he did not look out of the hat until after he had picked up the pin.
I have a thought about this story. I think there's two reasonable ways that this story happened. I think one of them is that Joseph saw where the pin landed, at least very, general area, 6-inch by 6-inch area. And could then figure out sort of like, okay, I'll play this along. But what I think is actually more likely, the more I think about it, is that Joseph Smith found the pin immediately, that the toothpick immediately. And while Martin is watching Joseph's eyes to see if they leave the hat, Joseph could very easily have then set the pin down exactly where he wanted Martin to find it. In other words, I think it's right over here. And as he's saying that, he sets it next to a stick or whatever. And suddenly Martin Harris and I forget the other gentleman's name that's with him, but Northrop Sweet, that's who it is. I don't know who that is, but Northrop Sweet. But that he has the pin and he sets it back down in the straw after pointing out to Harris where he's going to find it.
Can I tell you why any reconstruction of what Joseph Smith did and how he did this little parlor trick by Adam's Magic? He probably bought it at the little 5 and 10 store on the way home from school one day. 5 and dime. And we can't reconstruct it because what we are hearing is a description of the trick by a guy who was fooled by it. That's why you can't, when I say you can't trust it, what I mean is you cannot take it at face value that this is really what Joseph Smith did. This is the effect that it made upon Martin Harris.
As a magician, you said before that you love it when people talk about the magic trick after the trick is over because they're describing the trick from their point of view and how magical it was when you know exactly the steps you took to portray it as a magic trick when in reality it wasn't anything magic at all.
Yes, I've got only one word to say about this, Mr. Real. Do you know what that word is?
I don't.
Lacan.
Lacan.
Friday night. Okay, if you weren't watching, but if you were, it bears recalling that on Friday night, remember on Wednesday, the Wednesday before, there was this individual who'd come on the show for a little bit, talked about Lacan, who had never heard of. He's some kind of French philosopher.
Andrew?
Something like that, right? What,
Andrew.
Bill?
I think his name was Andrew.
I think you're right. And it was Lacan, right? So I'd never heard of him, but he called back on Friday. And on Friday, we have Annie Hall on the show. Thank you for putting my name first, Dan. I appreciate that. We have Annie Hall on the show, right? And Andrew calls back. Now, Annie was not watching on Wednesday, so she doesn't know he's calling back. She doesn't know anything about the conversation that was had on Wednesday with Andrew. Okay? So Andrew comes in onto the screen, and then Bill, just sort of out of nowhere, says, Lacan? And Andrew goes, oh, yeah, right. And he picks his book up and shows it to the screen that he's got the book written by Lacan, and Annie Hall loses it because she's so shocked that somehow Bill knew that this guy, Andrew, who's calling in, he hasn't called in earlier. There's been no discussion about Lacan as far as she knows. Bill says Lacan, and he reads his mind or something. He can see what's on the table in front of him, even though it's not apparent on the screen. And Bill insisted, in spite of me trying to throw myself in the way like a dutiful Secret Service agent, he kept wanting to explain it to her. And finally he did, over my extreme protestations, Bill. I'm still not very happy with you, young man. But he told her the secret, and then she went, oh, okay, that's how it was. You see, Joseph Smith didn't tell the secret.
Yeah, Joseph doesn't tell the secret. and Martin is fooled. And so what we get is the person in the audience who saw the magic trick explaining what they saw.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. There's that. This is a fun little story in church history. I want to note, by the way, this reminds me again of the story with Josiah Stoll being amazed at how Joseph Smith knew the Josiah Stoll farm. And there are these instances where Joseph Smith gets the loyalty of these people by performing one kind of trick. And because that one kind of trick seemed like real magic to them, they just fall hook, line, and sinker for all the rest of the narratives when the magic stopped working. Anyway, I'll just note that. Okay. This one here, Harris tells a story about Samuel Lawrence treasure digging once and encountering an 8 or 9 foot tall treasure guardian. And I thought, this sounds a little like Zelf. And I wonder because, and I'll have you read these if you don't mind, RFM. But what I want to note is that when Harris tells the story about Samuel Lawrence, what you don't know, and you'll learn it in this first piece, is that Harris is aware of Samuel Lawrence treasure digging with Hiram Smith, with Joseph Smith Sr., with Joseph Smith Jr., and something that Samuel Lawrence reported, it would be obvious that also Joseph Smith Jr. had heard the same story from Samuel Lawrence as well. Would you mind reading these two?
Yes, I would just love to. And I do mean that. Hang on just a second here. Just goofing with something, which I'll share with you here in a second. So here, you already read the part on the left.
Yep.
Joseph had this stone for some time. Once again, this is Martin Harris, same article, right?
Yep.
Joseph had this stone for some time. There was a company there in that neighborhood who were digging for money, supposed to have been hidden by the ancients. Of this company were old Mr. Stoll, there's Josiah. I think his name was Josiah. Also old Mr. Beeman. Also Samuel Lawrence, George Proper, Joseph Smith Jr. and his father, and his brother Hiram Smith. They dug for money in Palmyra, Manchester, also in Pennsylvania and other places.
Yep, period there.
Okay,
No.
so it says one time the old log schoolhouse south of Palmyra was suddenly lighted up and frightened them away. Samuel Lawrence told me that while they were digging, a large man who appeared to be 8 or 9 feet tall. Let me say that again. A large man who appeared to be 8 or 9 feet high came and sat on the ridge of the barn and motioned to them that they must leave. They motioned back that they would not, but that they afterwards became frightened and did leave.
I'm struck by how much these kinds of stories make their way in to the experiences that the people in the neighborhood had. And then as a believer, I just need to set these off to the side. These are crazy stories. They don't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But when Joseph tells other stories and other people believe him about the ones connected to Mormonism, those ones are credible, and those ones we should believe the testimony of everyone. If you're going to believe the testimony of someone encountering Moroni on the road, then you got to believe Martin Harris here, because Joseph Smith is part of this same company. These are the stories that these treasure diggers told, and they saw things that are absurd and they believed them.
A large man who appeared to be 8 or 9 feet high on the ridge of the barn. You know what that reminds me of?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Let me take that
Trying
down.
to put it up there. Yeah, I was doing that actually. Does that look familiar to you?
I see a shadow behind the stack on the roof.
That's the 8 or 9 foot tall high guy on the top of a roof of a barn.
Is this
okay?
Is this from the
How
movie?
about there in the live chat? Anybody know that scene?
Is this the movie Signs?
Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you now.
No, that was me making clicking noises because
I thought you were saying swing away, Meryl.
Oh, that was the noises that the alien made.
Yeah, this was kind of a a shocking little moment there when Mel Gibson looks out the window and sees that.
Mm.
It's so quick in the movie, I actually can't even see it. So I'm glad I was able to get this still so we could illustrate this story, because this kind of crap happened all the time when Joseph Smith and his dad and other people were out treasure digging at night, as you must.
Yeah, there's all these stories of hitting a box with a shovel and then it disappears into the earth. And if you're gonna believe Joseph Smith, then you should believe him all the way. And you shouldn't pick and choose which Joseph Smith stories you believe. If Joseph was involved in a story and it made its way out there, whether it hurts the credibility or helps the credibility of Mormonism, they should all be looked at collectively and not sorted out as pro-Mormon or pro-treasure digging, and then the pro-treasure digging ones are just ignored.
Yeah, all these stories make it more difficult for me to believe Joseph Smith's prophetic claims, but it sure makes Mormonism a hell of a lot more interesting.
It is. I always tell people you can hate Mormonism all you want, but it is 200 years of the most fascinating history, religious history in the world. All right. So here's after, and that wasn't so we told those stories, the 8 or 9 foot tall person, the Samuel Lawrence reported. We talked about them treasure digging and all that stuff. Martin goes through 4, 5, 6 different stories, and they're all absurd. And again, if folks want to read the document, you can go read this monthly periodical and you can read them for yourself. But I love what Martin ends with. He says, these things were real to them. I believe he's talking about the treasure digging stories were real to Joseph Smith and those who associated with him. They were real to Hiram. They were real to Joseph Smith Sr. They were real to Samuel Lawrence. He says these things were real to them. I believe because they were told to me in confidence and told by different ones, and their stories agreed. Again, that's a big deal for Martin. He said in regards to the stone and finding the plates, it's because the family and Smith agreed. And they seemed to be in earnest. I knew they were in earnest. He's had to say that twice. So in the testimony of Harris, he recounts numerous absurd tales of treasure digging and the treasures moving when being close to being found, or tales about treasure guardians of immense height, and other tales that are embellished or imagined, but then tells us he knows they are true simply because they were told to him in confidence. Multiple accounts were told and agreed to by the bunch, and those telling the story seemed earnest. So he believed it. So there's that.
And maybe they did too.
And maybe they did. But once one senses that maybe these stories are too absurd to believe, then one has to go next and go, why does the Book of Mormon originate with a treasure guardian, Moroni, guarding a treasure, the gold plate, buried in a hill like treasure digging, and also involves a magic seer stone that Joseph Smith found that was involved in treasure digging? And the reasonable answer is that it really is just another treasure digging story that's embellished further to take on spiritual meaning. This was interesting, and you've got some data on this. So I'll read this, and then you can share with the audience some data that you've got on this, at least in the next slide or the slide after. The 1832 Doom in 4, maybe it's not this one, maybe it's the next one. 1832 Doom in 4 years handbills. In this, I thought was interesting. I never heard this story before either. In the spring of 1832, Martin Harris traveled to see Newell K. Whitney, who had broken his leg and was staying in Greenville, Indiana. In a letter to his wife, Emma, Joseph Smith wrote, I would inform you that Brother Martin has arrived here. Martin arrived on Saturday the same week he left Chagrin. And I remember hearing bits of this story. I remember there being a story in church history where Newell K. Whitney broke his leg. And I think he tells Joseph to go do whatever. And Joseph's like, no, I have loyalty to my friends. And he stays behind to help take care of Newell K. Whitney. Well, Martin Harris traveled to see them. And Joseph informs Emma that Martin had arrived Saturday the same week as he left Chagrin. During the September of 1832, Harris, who was known for his prophetic predictions, wrote the following two statements for a friend who placed them upon a wall of his office. And this is tied to that event. I think he wrote these while he was with Joseph and with Newell Kay.
But that's spring to September. You think he stayed there for 6 months?
No. So I don't no. I'm wondering then, maybe Dan can comment. Maybe this first paragraph just happened to be right next to this other story and they're unrelated.
Yeah, maybe.
But it was sort of, it was told in a way that this paragraph seemed to set the tone for the rest of the story. I tried to find documents of these, what they're calling handbills. I couldn't find them. So I don't have any document that shows these two, but I can find both faithful sources online and critical sources online that quote these two things. So
do they address it at Fair Mormon?
I don't know that. I didn't see it
I'll
there.
check it out.
There were a couple of blogs. Yeah, please take a look. During September of 1832, Harris, who was known for his prophetic predictions, wrote the following two statements for a friend who placed them upon the wall of his office. Within 4 years from September 1832, there will not be one wicked person left in the United States, that the righteous will be gathered to Zion, Missouri, and that there will be no president over these United States after that time. Signed, Martin Harris. So Martin Harris here is making a prophecy if ever there is something in a prophetic style language. He is saying what it will be that will happen. And then he does it again. He says, I do hereby assert and declare that in 4 years from the date hereof, every sectarian and religious denomination in the United States shall be broken down, and every Christian shall be gathered unto the Mormonites, and the rest of the human race shall perish. If these things do not take place, I will hereby consent to have my hand separated from my body. Signed, Martin Harris.
Ouch.
And, yeah. So he makes these two prophecies. They obviously don't come true. And so in my mind, here's a moment where you evaluate whether Martin really does have the ability to speak by the Spirit. Is he really a spiritual tool in God's handbag for the restoration? Because he seems all throughout his life to make connections or to say things that don't end up adding up. And here's these two examples. Did you find anything on this?
Yeah. So there is no extant version of the handbills. There's only one reference to it. It's in 1838, 6 years later, when Stephen Burnett, who has been excommunicated and is now an anti-Mormon, is writing about this. So that's the source, Stephen Burnett, anti-Mormon. That's basically the two approaches that Fair Mormon takes on this. There's none that's existing, and no handbill exists. And it comes from Stephen Burnett, who, writing in 1838 about something he says happened in 1832, it would have already passed, right? In 1836.
Yeah, it would have. Again, if you take the story as credible that Martin did prophesy on these two occasions about this, it would make sense that when the time came for this to have come to pass, that then you would remember, like, oh, like the 4 years have happened and this didn't occur.
Yeah,
and
then
so,
they start calling him Five Finger Martin.
Yeah. While the apologists would maybe want to discount this because there isn't a verifiable copy, it makes sense that it would be a late remembrance, because one would wait until after the 4 years had happened. That would both trigger one's mind to the story, and it would also be when one would verify that this never came to pass. So there's that. And this is the Stephen Burnett letter, letter 15, April 1838, letter book 2, pages 64 to 66, the Joseph Smith Papers website. And I believe I do have this in the sources that I'll put in the show notes soon as the episode is over. Okay. And then there's more from this Burnett letter. So Harris's trustworthiness is most sharply debated over events in early 1838, apostate Stephen Burnett, and it's spelled B-U-R-N-E-T. So if I spelled it different somewhere else, B-U-R-N-E-T, wrote that at a church meeting in February 1838, Harris publicly declared that he had never, quote, never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination, unquote. I'm going to put the comments back up on the screen just so in case.
You know how you say Burnett in Texas, Bill?
Burnett.
That's it.
Stephen Burnett. And even claimed that the 8 witnesses had never actually handled them. Now, he regretted saying it, but not regretting the way he articulates. It's not like it's not like it wasn't true and I shouldn't have said it. It was just, I wish I wouldn't have caused this much ruckus. I wish I wouldn't have said it and stirred up people in not believing.
He had a Hagrid moment.
Yeah. So Harris publicly declared that he had never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination. Now, that's true, by the way. He has this vision with Whitmer and with Cowdery, and then he has a physical experience where they're wrapped up in a cloth. So he did never see the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination, and even claimed that the 8 witnesses never actually handled them.
That's a problem, because that's our whole claim to fame is we handled them and we turned the leaves over and they looked like gold.
Yeah, and there are other problems with that story of the 8 witnesses. I think it's Lucy Smith, or it's some other source. Maybe it's John Whitmer, and John Whitmer is one of the 8 witnesses. But one of the accounts reports that 4 of them saw the plates in either the Smith home or I think the Whitmer home. They didn't all 8 go out into the woods and have an 8-person experience. At least one of the documents from a trusted source, John Whitmer or Lucy Mack Smith, reports that it would essentially have been 2 groups of 4, and at least with one of the groups, it didn't occur in the woods.
So like we saw them and we handled them.
Yeah. Yeah. We saw and handled them.
Yeah, but not necessarily at the same time or all together.
Right. So that becomes interesting.
But now he's saying they didn't even handle them.
If true, that implies that Harris himself suggested his written testimony was false. 2 weeks later, however, Harris stood in the New Kirtland Temple and reversed his claims. He insisted that the Book of Mormon was true and said he had hefted the plates under a cloth, but only saw them as I saw a city through a mountain. How well do you see a city through a mountain?
It depends on how big the city is.
What if the mountain is...
It's such a strange thing, isn't it? Because, I used to hear that and I would envision in my mind a mountain with a big hole in the middle and on the far side a city, and I can see it through the hole in the mountain. But then I started thinking, why am I forcing a hole into this scenario? Because there's got to be a way for him to see the city. But what he's saying is, I saw it as clearly as something that you can't see at all.
Yeah, he uses that analogy himself intentionally. He wants the listener to his words to know that he saw a city he saw the plates as if it was a city on the other side of a mountain, completely obscured.
He was remote viewing it.
It does come back to that kind of, doesn't it? He admitted regretting his earlier statement, saying he never should have told the testimony of the 8 was false if he had not been influenced.
I should not have said that.
I regret it already. In short, in the same month, by the way, I'll tell you a little story. Group of friends down in southern Utah. Some of us did something. We had a little party or got together, and I don't remember why, but another portion of our close friend group was excluded. Not like intentionally, but some people went to the party. It was like a last minute, hey, let's get 8 of us together. We got together, had fun time. The next day, it's 8 of us plus other folks from the friend group. And somehow a conversation ensues, and I say out loud, we had something about having a good time last night with some of you. And then one of the people in the room's like, whoa, wait a minute. I wasn't invited to this. And instantly, just like Martin Harris, I had regretted that I had said a thing. It seems to me that Martin regrets having said the truth.
Yes.
Which then got people in a frenzy about what really happened. Let's see here. In short, in the same month, Harris gave two opposite accounts. Apostate Burnett, and I'll say it that way, saw this as a sign of fraud, while others suggest Harris was confused or coerced. The historical record itself shows Harris asserting in 1838 both that the plates were only visionary and moments later that they were real. Now, they can be both real and to him, or let me say it differently. They can be both visionary to him, seen visionary, and he believes that they're real. He could testify to both of those, but that doesn't mean that they were in reality real.
Okay, so let me see if I'm understanding this. Okay, Bill. This is the same time that Stephen Burnett is remembering this 1832, 4 years till doom, prophecy of Martin Harris. So this appears to be the catalyst that Martin Harris has now in 1838, early 1838, like January, just said this stuff in front of Stephen Burnett. This is, I mean, I think he's with the, I'm not sure whose side he's on, okay? But obviously there's a huge issue going on in the church and a huge schism. He ends up leaving the church. I mean, when he leaves the church, is he an anti-Mormon or just an anti-Joseph Smith and wanting to go back to earlier Mormonism, therefore calling it by the original name of the church, Church of Christ, like Martin Harris did? I'm not sure about that. All I'm saying is that it's the same source. So it starts to make a little more sense to me now that Martin Harris saying crazy stuff would remind Stephen Burnett that, hey, this isn't the first time he said crazy stuff. Back in 1832, he was saying 4 years until the world ends. Or at least he didn't say the world ends. He said until there's no president anymore in the United States and everybody's going to be gathering to Zion.
And I'll add too, so the letters on the right, we saw the pages in the previous slide, but I have a little square there in the center top, and this is from way earlier. I just wanted folks to get a feel for how devoted Stephen Burnett was to the church at an earlier time. He writes to Joseph Smith.
This is October, November. This is 3 months earlier.
Well, the letter's in April.
Which letter?
So
the one on the far right.
At least this page is dated 15th. This page on the right is dated 15th April 1838.
Oh, that's afterward.
This is after. Yeah,
I was going to that one clipping that says October 2nd, 1837 in the middle.
Yeah, and then you got the February 1838 is on the left. So Burnett, I believe, is writing the church back and forth. And again, Dan Vogel can correct this, but the middle one is showing how dedicated Burnett was to the church. The Brother Smith, the following correspondence between myself and William Hayden, the champion of the Campbellites in this quarter, passed last fall and finally resulted in a 2-day oral debate. I forward you the letters, and if you think they will be of any benefit to your readers, they are at your disposal. At the end of the letters, I subjoin a recapitulation of the debate in a very concise manner, as a synopsis of the whole would be quite lengthy for publication in your paper. And it ends up making this debate back and forth ends up making its way into like the Times and Seasons or the Messenger and Advocate.
Bill, this was back in the good old days when Mormons wanted to debate people.
Yeah, that even when I came into the church, there was still a little bit of that, but that came to an end, didn't it?
I spent the 1980s spoiling for a debate. I would, stop religious ministers on the street just to try and get them to debate me about Mormonism.
Yeah. So Stephen Burnett was, and I hope I'm saying that right. You talked me into it. Stephen Burnett was very zealous about Mormonism, and he wanted to defend it, and he thought he was doing a good job.
This is 3 months before.
Yeah.
The whole thing with Martin Harris.
So much so that he sends his debate back to be published in the church periodical.
And it's one thing if you got old Martin Harris, kind of the crackpot. Everybody kind of smiles behind his back as he walks away. But here comes Martin Harris, and he makes some crazy dumbass prediction of 4 years and it's doom, right? That's one thing. But it's a different thing entirely when he starts talking about events that he was actually present to witness and starts describing them in different ways than you have been taught and it's been written down.
Yeah, I'm only stopping here for a second because Dan Vogel mentions that the prediction is from Mormonism Unveiled and other places, so it's not just one source. And then somebody's correcting him on the spelling of unveiled, and I'll just say, by the way, it may need Dan to give a second answer because the John D. Lee biography is called Mormonism Unveiled, spelled one way, and then the anti-Mormon work, Mormonism Unveiled, is spelled a different way. And I'm not sure which book Dan might be pointing to. I'm assuming it's the Philastrius Hurlbut, Eber D. Howe book, but I could be wrong.
You know, the funny thing is I think I know why it is that you know the difference, that you know that there's two of those books and that they have unveiled spelled differently.
You tell me why.
Because that was going to be the name of the show.
Yes, and we debated which spelling to use.
Yes, and I said, get rid of it altogether.
And I'll say that the Mormonism Unveiled, the John D. Lee book, was in Family Pawn. So that was the first place I seen that book. And at first, I thought it was like an original edition of the Mormonism Unveiled by Eber D. Howe and Philastrius Hurlbut. But when I opened it up, I saw it was a biography of John D. Lee. And I thought that's interesting that there are these two books dealing with Mormonism that both wanted to use the phonetic of unveiled, the phonetic word unveiled, but using it two different ways, two different meanings, two different spellings, kind of like there and there. But anyway, interesting. There's that.
Yeah.
All right.
Two T's.
So here is, again, this is from this letter from the April 1838 letter. And again, I spelled Burnett's name wrong. I'm sorry about that. I just assumed Burnett with two T's and then saw just this morning that it was one and wasn't in a place where I could fix it. But Burnett's
he's like in a position at this time. Now, this is April. So this is between October and April. That's 6 months. And he's been in a position I've been in, you've been in, lots of people out there in our audience have been in or are in currently, where he's just having a tough time of making Mormonism work because he's got parts of it that he really likes, that he believes. And then there's these other parts that are just not making any sense and are trying to tell him something different than the believing part.
And what bothers me the most, RFM, what you read from Fair Mormon, like this is just an antagonist. This is an anti-Mormon. This is an apostate. He should be dismissed. When no, this is our story. This guy was zealous for the faith. He was debating ministers of other religions. He felt he was defending the church admirably. He wrote church leadership, sharing what the progress he was making. He finds out then he becomes disillusioned because things in Mormonism don't add up, and he tries to sort it out. And then in the end, he writes that he just couldn't make it work. So he says, I have reflected long and deliberately upon the history of this church and weighed the evidence for and against it, loath to give it up. In other words, I don't want to give it up. It's difficult to give up. But when I came to hear Martin Harris state in public that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes. And by the way, you can follow along on the right-hand side there. Only in vision or imagination, neither Oliver nor David, and also the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it. I'm going to stop here for a second. We have historical evidence that points to a narrative where Joseph Smith, the 8 witness, somebody, I think it's here, maybe here, I think it's one other place where it's recorded that the 8 witnesses were hesitant to sign the statement, that they weren't quite in line with the way it was worded. And it draws my attention to what you just said, which is maybe 4 of them saw them in vision and 4 of them hefted them in a cloth. And now you get the 8 of them together and you say these 8 men saw and hefted the plates. And you now compel these men to sign the statement. Did you foresee it? Yes, sign it, damn it. Did you foreheft them? Great, sign it, damn it. And now you've got a signature that they saw and hefted them, when in reality there are two groups of four. And Martin Harris is giving the game away by telling Burnett and others that in spite of what these early testimony statements say, that's not what happened. It says here, neither Oliver nor David and also the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it. The last pedestal gave way. In my view, our foundations was sapped, and the entire superstructure fell a heap of ruins. I therefore 3 weeks since, in the stone chapel, gave a full history of the church since I became acquainted with it. The false preaching and prophesying, again back to Martin, etc., of Joseph, together with the reasons why I took the course which I was resolved to do, and renounce the Book of Mormon with the whole scene of lying and deception practiced by Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, so he says JS and SR, in this church, believing as I verily do that it is all a wicked deception palmed upon us unawares. Now, he could be one of us. That the way he wrote that, every step along the way, I said, yep, us too. Yep, us too. Yep, us too. We denigrate him as having no credibility because he left. But if we're going to denigrate everyone simply because they leave or they criticize the church, then how is one ever supposed to arrive at a perspective based on the evidence that the church isn't true if we discount everything that points to it not being true?
Yeah, it seems to be this very common thing that he's describing. And if I can put it this way, that as a member of the church, as I learned more and more about the church, over time, I kept encountering situations, usually with Joseph Smith, sometimes with others, where I kept having to make allowances for him. And I was glad to make allowances for Joseph Smith because he's a prophet of God. Yes, of course, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And so over time, you make an allowance here and an allowance here and an allowance here and an allowance here. You've got at least double-digit allowances on Joseph Smith alone. And you're going along very, very happy. And then somebody hits you over the head with a 2x4. And that 2x4 is a fact, like hearing Martin Harris basically renounce or substantially modify or correct what he's saying happened during his witness of the Book of Mormon and what happened with the 8 witnesses as well. So that's the sound of Stephen Burnett getting hit upside the head with a 2x4. And all of a sudden, when that happens, all those allowances that you've been building up, that you've been making for Joseph Smith, it knocks them loose. And you start saying, I would not make allowances like this for anybody else in the world. Why am I making it for this person? And what are the odds that all my allowances are correct and that he really is virtuous and innocent and that all my allowances are really true and he really didn't do any of these things that people are saying he did?
Yeah. As Dan Vogel's putting it, a whistleblower gets fired and then called a disgruntled former employee.
I know, because that happened to me.
And then, as if that wasn't enough from Burnett, Warren Parrish writes a letter on March 13th, 1838, in the Waldo Patriot, Belfast, Maine. I don't know if it's like volume 1, number 19, May 4th, 1838.
My favorite newspaper, the Waldo Patriot.
It says, Kirtland, March 13th, 1838, Sir, yours of February 20th was put into my hands this morning by the postmaster of this place, requesting me to state some facts in relation to da-da-da. And he goes on, but I just wanted to leave the entry there of how it starts. And then further down, he says, many are moving away from Zion to the far west on account of the confusion that prevails among them. Martin Harris, one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon, told me and others a few days since that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, but in a vision. He also said that Joseph nor any other man ever saw them in any other way, which agrees with the revelations See Book of Covenants, New Edition, page 171, on comparing the first and second edition of the Book of Covenants, which Smith claims to have received by direct revelation from heaven. There is a wide difference. And he's talking about the changes in the scriptures.
But mainly what this is we've got a second witness, at least to this aspect of Martin Harris saying what it was that Stephen Burnett quoted him as saying in the other document.
Yep. It can't be just a misremembering by Burnett. It has to also be something that other people did, in fact, hear straight from Martin Harris's mouth, which is why the apologists try to deal with this problem in a different way. They don't deny that Martin said this. They try to shape how we should interpret what it is that Martin said. They can't get rid of it. Martin told everyone that nobody, including Joseph Smith, ever saw anything actually. All right, here's a fun
favorite.
Yeah. Would you want to read this one?
Oh, if I can. It's something about a deer, and it's something about Jesus, and it comes up to Dear Jesus.
I'll make it really big, and you can just let's get rid of us.
Dream come true, Bill.
Just that red section.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just imagining how this is going to sound on the audio only portion. When you say I'm going to make it bigger, and then you say just the red section. Okay, well, here we go.
It does get red.
Yes. He told. So this is someone writing an article referencing Martin Harris, I think. Mm-hmm. So he told a gentleman in Palmyra after one of his excursions to Pennsylvania, while the translation of the Book of Mormon was going on, that on the way he met the Lord Jesus Christ, who walked along by the side of him in the shape of a deer for 2 or 3 miles, talking with him as familiarly as one man talks with another deer. No, I'm kidding. The other deer is not there. It's just as one man talks with another. So if this is true, and it's not just spiritualized, Martin Harris is allegedly telling a story about walking along for 2 or 3 miles out in the woods, or I guess on the road, talking with a deer who is the Lord Jesus Christ appearing in that shape for whatever reason.
If you believe Martin Harris as a witness for the Book of Mormon, why don't you believe Martin Harris talked to a deer for 2 or 3 miles thinking it was Jesus Christ?
Because that's just crazy, Bill. The deer stuff is crazy. The stuff about the Book of Mormon and the angel and the vision, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
Still deer season. Jay Castro says, by the way, this is something that a number of years ago, when I was pondering upon this story, it suddenly occurred to me that if people in Joseph Smith's day and amongst his community could see divine beings in local flora and fauna, then maybe what he saw as God the Father and Jesus Christ was a couple of bald eagles sitting on a branch high up in a tree.
It could be anything after this story, right? If the people in the early movement of the Restoration, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Joseph Smith, if they were prone to see treasure guardians, if they were prone to see Jesus Christ in the form of a deer, then yeah, it seems like they're prone to see. You'd have to take every moment in church history where you thought something definitive happened. Again, salamander or toad being Moroni.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these instances where trustworthy sources of the Book of Mormon are seeing angelic visitors or the Savior himself in the form of animals.
Mm-hmm.
That now you would want to go back into any other story in the Restoration and leave room that's exactly what they're doing. As you pointed out, Joseph Smith saw 2 bald eagles in a tree, and for him, that was good enough to call God the Father and the Son.
Right. And it may not make sense to us because we're looking at it the wrong way. But if we look at it from their point of view, where the woods and the villages and the hills and the forests and all this stuff largely trackless, and it's filled with beings and fairies and all sorts of things. And sometimes they take the form of animals. And that makes sense. I mean, come on. If you believe in the first part, the second part's not so hard. They take the form of animals from time to time, which means that anytime you see an animal, it's probably an animal, but you never know for sure because it could be something else. And so, from that point of view, I know it still seems strange to us. I think it seems strange to a lot of people back then too. But Martin Harris, I think, would have been totally down with talking to Jesus for 2 or 3 miles in the form of a deer.
And I'll just say here, when Mary Whitmer, hello, Mary, when they claim they saw Moroni and then he went under the shed, that also suggests that he transitioned to something, a critter, an insect, a small animal that could go underneath the shed.
Yes.
Because it didn't have a crawl space. It was just on the ground. It didn't have a spot to hide underneath.
I don't know. Just because I haven't seen it. I don't know if it was up on something or if it just had a hard dirt floor, packed floor. By the way, it occurs to me, I know why it is that Jesus chose to appear in the form of a deer. I figured out the answer to the mystery. You know what that is, Bill?
So you would fawn over him?
That's actually very funny. Very, very good. I like it. Do you have your little your applause thing? I think we need that.
Can you hear
That
it?
was good. That was good. I was going to say something else. I was going to say the reason that Jesus appeared in the form of a deer to Martin Harris is because they got deer in Pennsylvania. Now, if Jesus had appeared as an elephant to Martin Harris, that would have been something.
That would have been cool.
Yes, or a T-Rex.
By the way, there are deer all over the place in the Midwest. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, Jesus is being very careful because he doesn't want to get accidentally shot during hunting season. So he mixes in a place where there's tons of other deer to lessen the chances.
All right. If we keep this to the normal time, we've got about a half hour left, and I'm hoping we can zip through this.
Okay. I'll shut up.
No. You do you, but I'm just noting that we got quite a few slides still to go. And I really don't want to do a part 2. So, spiritual gypsy. Over the 1840s and 50s, Harris became a spiritual gypsy. Not quite as good looking as the one on the right, but one nonetheless. He followed several short-lived prophets and sects, though he never renounced his Book of Mormon witness. 1843, he briefly joined the apocalyptic Shaker movement, embracing the so-called Holy Roll, which we'll talk about in a moment. 1846, he accepted the call from James Strang and went as a Strangite missionary to England. Again, he left Mormonism, came back to a different faction of Mormonism. However, the mission proved to be a fiasco. The LDS Millennial Star mocked Harris's behavior, calling him monomaniacal, again, there's that, and accusing him of yielding to the temptation of the devil. Reports say he tried to speak in a London chapel when he was rebuffed and began denouncing Brigham Young's 12 apostles, ended up briefly arrested in the street. Even so, witnesses recall that before he left, Harris publicly affirmed the Book of Mormon was true and Joseph was a true prophet. And as sure as you know the sun is shining, I know Joseph Smith was a true prophet. He left England after only 6 weeks and returned home by December of 46. Back in Kirtland, he joined McClellan's group of rebelling elders. At January 1847 meeting, Harris seconded McClellan's motion to reorganize the Church of Christ under David Whitmer's leadership. This was an early version of the reorganized church, though Harris never formally affiliated with it. By 1850s, Harris drifted back to Kirtland or Palmyra, largely kept out of the public Mormon life, though he apparently considered plural marriage as apostate doctrine. Throughout these years, don't worry, Martin, the church ended up doing the same thing. Throughout these years, he always said the Book of Mormon was real, even if he temporarily rejected church leadership. And so the one here that they mentioned, the Shaker Roll Book, this was 1843 to 1844. 4 independent sources report Harris soon afterward became a follower of Mother Ann Lee and the United Society of Believers, the Shakers. He is linked to the New Hampshire publication from 1843, A Holy, Sacred, and Divine Roll and Book from the Lord God of Heaven. to the inhabitants of earth. Sorry, thank you for turning that. Revealed in New Lebanon, New York. 500 copies were printed and bound September 1843. What the book claimed, typical Shaker belief, then held that messages came from the spirit world and from Mother Ann Lee. The volume included a holy roll by John the Revelator and revelations attributed to Elijah. So again, he's believing extra canonical scripture. He's believing in other prophets outside of Mormonism. And if you believe Martin Harris about what he experienced in Mormonism, then you got to believe Martin Harris in what he experienced outside of Mormonism, or you have to explain in a reasonable way why you trust one side of things but not the other, beyond you simply want one side to be true and you don't believe the other. It goes on and on here.
Now, this next part is really important, Bill.
Oh, please, go ahead.
It also preserved, okay, the book claimed, it also preserved angelic visitation testimonies showing believers the roll and book, which sounds an awful lot like what it is that Martin Harris and the three witnesses went through.
Yeah, that they have a spiritual testimony of this, just like he had a spiritual testimony in the Book of Mormon.
Angelic visitation.
Yeah, and he subscribed to it. Myra Bean affirmed its divine origin, calling it the true and unalterable word of our Heavenly Father. Martin believed that. These manifestations resonated deeply with him in an 1884 Kirtland debate. Clark Braden, we've gone over that name before. I don't remember why, but we've gone over that name before. Clark Braden reported that Harris repeatedly said he had as much evidence for the Shaker book as for the Book of Mormon. The same amount of evidence. That should be disruptive if you are a believer in Mormonism. By late 1840s.
It's good if you're a Shaker, right?
What's that?
But it's good if you're a Shaker, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you're a Shaker, you should be bothered by Martin's testimony of the Book of Mormon experiences. If you're a Mormon, you should be shaken by his experiences of the Shaker experiences.
But not stirred.
But yes, but by late 1844, Harris believed in and bore testimony of the Shaker sacred roll.
Yes.
And you can read about that in this, I think it's a dialogue article. It's Martin Harris, The Kirtland Years, 1831 to 1870 by H. Michael Marcourt, great scholar. Okay, now, section 49.
Right.
Please.
I think it's commonly known that section 49 is a revelation that there's an intersection right there with Shakerism. And God answered some questions Joseph Smith had about how it was that the Shakers had everything wrong. And he gave it in the Revelation, section 49, so that these individuals, some missionaries whose names are listed there, could take it with them when they went debating with the Shakers. I think that's how the story goes. But there it talks about how, let me see here. Lehman Copley, right? Christ's second coming, to which he had formerly belonged. Some of the beliefs of the Shakers were that Christ's second coming had already occurred and that he had appeared in the form of a deer. No, I'm kidding. That he had appeared in the form of a woman, Ann Lee. They did not consider baptism by water essential. They rejected marriage and believed in a life of total celibacy. Some Shakers also forbade the eating of meat. Okay. So that's the situation there with the Shakers, who are a church, definitely a big church, going on in Joseph Smith's time and neighborhood. Now, here's something that was interesting I found as I was researching this, because it reminded me of something in the Book of Mormon.
Is that the same lady?
That's Ann Lee right there.
Wow. What a looker.
Total celibacy. So this is how it goes. During the American Revolution, okay, Lee, that's Ann Lee, and her followers maintained a stance of neutrality, maintaining the position that they were pacifists. Ann Lee and her followers did not side with either the British or the colonists. This caused contention towards the Shakers due to their refusal to sign an oath of allegiance. Ann Lee opened her testimony to the world's people on the famous Dark Day in May 1780, when the sun disappeared and it was so dark that candles had to be lit to see indoors at noon. Does that sound like something to you from 3rd Nephi, Bill?
Yeah, that everything was so dark that even the fire didn't light things up enough.
Right. At least they could light candles here, apparently. I don't think they could even light candles in the Book of Mormon.
No fire would even start.
Right. And it wasn't just an afternoon, it was 3 days. Once again, a penchant for exaggeration is evident. The article goes on. She soon recruited a number of followers who had joined the New Light revival at New Lebanon, New York in 1779, including Lucy Wright. And yes, that's New York. So all of these things are very close by. It's hard to think that anybody who had any knowledge of Shakers at the time wouldn't at least have heard of this dark day in May 1780, especially since it became so important to the Quakers themselves. New England's dark day occurred on May 19th, 1780, when an unusual darkening of the daytime sky was observed over the New England states and parts of eastern Canada. The primary cause of the event is believed to have been a combination of smoke from forest fires, a thick fog, and cloud cover. The darkness was so complete that candles were required from noon on. It did not disperse until the middle of the next night. When it says next night, I think it means that night. I don't think it means it went through another full day and on to the next night. But still pretty alarming. Can you read this part, Bill?
Yep. So this says Seventh-day Adventist author and editor Arthur S. Maxwell mentions this event in his The Bible Story series, volume 10. The significance of the incident is still debated among Adventist scholars today. Progressive Adventists do not necessarily interpret this as a sign that Jesus would soon return, but traditional, historic, and conservative Adventists who hold Ellen G. White's writings in higher regard still consider this date as one of the fulfillments of biblical prophecy, specifically Matthew 24:29, in which Jesus declares to his disciples immediately after the distress of those days of anti-Christian persecution, that's added in, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. New International Version.
Right. And shortly after the 3 days of darkness in the Book of Mormon, Jesus shows up to the people and he appears to them in the New World among the Nephites at the temple at Bountiful. Okay, so I just wanted to put that in there. I thought that was of some interest. Oh, it concludes the likely cause of the dark day was smoke from extensive forest fires, at least as a contributing factor, for which there is evidence from the time of the dark day. When a fire does not kill a tree and the tree later grows, scar marks are left in the growth rings. This makes it possible to approximate the date of a past fire. Researchers examining tree rings and fire scars in trees in the area that is today occupied by Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada, see evidence of a fire in 1780 and attribute the dark day to that. So there is evidence of a big forest fire apparently at that time and place.
All right. Then Phineas Young and others wrote to Brigham Young in the 12 that Martin Harris is a firm believer in Shakerism. Says his testimony is greater than it was of the Book of Mormon. How the hell can that be if you saw angels and you flipped the leaves of plates?
That's true. And Phineas Young, he was a terrible apostate. He was an anti-Mormon. We don't have to listen to anything he said.
Isn't he Brigham Young's brother?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was total tongue-in-cheek.
I know.
You can't use the old he's an anti-Mormon ploy.
They noted 40 or 50 good brethren in Kirtland, a majority locally, every kind of spirit to deal with, and that they still controlled the Kirtland temple. No record shows Harris repudiating this elevated regard for the Shaker book, and the length of his attachment is unknown. Notably, Jeremiah Cooper, Cooper visited in July 1845 and found Harris still testifying of the Book of Mormon, saying he wrote part of it while Mr. Joseph Smith translated from the plates of gold. So again, Martin, the Harris, let me say this again. Jeremiah Cooper noted that Martin Harris told him that he, Harris, wrote part of it while Mr. Joseph Smith translated. And again, it adds from the gold plates. It's not just that he left LDS leadership. He embraced new revelatory texts, not revelatory, Mr. Stevenson. That diversity of charismatic allegiance undercuts any claim he was a uniquely sober evaluator of supernatural claims. And so here's some pictures of the Shakers. And there's a front cover of the Holy, Sacred, and Divine Roland book from the Lord God of heaven to the inhabitants of the earth. Martin believed in this movement more, at least as much, if not more, and more in some of the words, than he did Mormonism.
Isn't that amazing? If I had had the experience that Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer have their signatures, or at least their names attached to it under the testimony of the three witnesses, if I had had that experience, I wouldn't be thinking anybody else was any better unless I had some kind of better experience than that, having an angel come down and talk to me and hearing the voice of God declaring that the words of the book are true. So when you got Martin Harris, one of the witnesses, the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon, who also believes in the Shaker scripture, this roll and book, and has them as equal weight, believing them to be scripture. The problem is, unless you've got a really good reason for favoring one and disregarding the other or discounting the other, then you're stuck in a position of having to, there's a word that I'm trying to think of, where you're justifying special pleading. You have to special plead for one or the other, unless you're going to say they're both equally valid. And that means 100 to 0. They're equally valid. All right. His testimonies are equally valuable to me in my quest to try and figure out which of these are from God. And as soon as I try and favor the Book of Mormon over that, I'm engaged in special pleading. That's not allowed. This is a logical fallacy, but it's one we fall into a lot of times because we're really trying to not find the truth as much as we are to corroborate and confirm what we already believe.
And on the other hand, if you see this through the lens that Martin never did see an angel, at least not in a way that was super solid for him, he never did see the plates themselves physically. Everything was as though a city on the other side of a mountain. Then it makes perfect sense why he could easily believe other spiritual traditions where the same degree of faith is needed to believe in that spiritual system.
If you see Jesus in a deer, how much is it going to mean to you to see an angel?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
I don't know what that angel was. Might have been another deer. Could have been, a hummingbird, a beaver, a muskrat.
Harris briefly threw in with James J. Strang and went to England in late 1846. BYU Studies Deep Dive documents the short mission, the public turmoil, and Harris's insistence even then that the Book of Mormon was true. Accounts describe him as being rebuffed in chapels. In at least one report, detained in the street, he was back within weeks. Harris had a pattern of movement hopping, chasing gurus, and spiritual truth claims within several faiths. Yet he wouldn't renounce the Book of Mormon. And again, that's all the apologist cares about. It doesn't matter. All of this stuff is just secondary details. He never renounced the Book of Mormon. Well,
and he never renounced the Shaker scripture either, did he?
The Holy Roll. He never renounced it either. After arriving in Kirtland, Martin Harris discovered that local Latter-day Saints had rejected James Strang's leadership. William McClellan, now in Kirtland, was instead promoting David Whitmer as Joseph Smith's rightful successor, citing Smith's 1834 ordination of Whitmer.
Mm-hmm.
At a January 23rd, 1847 church conference in Kirtland, McClellan moved, seconded by Martin Harris, that the group reclaim the name Church of Christ, rejecting later additions like of Latter-day Saints. The motion carried unanimously. McClellan's publication, The Ensign of Liberty, and you see it there in the bottom right, later reported that members questioned the validity of baptisms performed after Smith's supposed ordination of Whitmer. McClellan then dictated a revelation directing that he, Harris, and Leonard Rich be rebaptized, confirmed, and reordained as high priest under divine authority. On February 13th, 1847, Harris was baptized into McClellan's new Church of Christ, which claimed about 42 members. The group declared that true believers must abandon the fictitious name Latter-day Saints and return to the original Church of Christ. Meanwhile, Lester Brooks wrote to James Strang, complaining that Harris was undermining Strang's claims from Kirtland, calling his earlier decision to take Harris to England, quote, the greatest blunder I ever committed, unquote.
Martin Harris was the greatest blunder a lot of people ever committed.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we're seeing a lot of that tonight. By the way, the picture in the top right is William McClellan.
You see, this whole thing about the appointment of David Whitmer is so interesting. We won't go into it. That I don't know if I made some slides, but I'm just going to say it here in passing. When Joseph Smith ordained David Whitmer, he ordained him with the words that if Joseph Smith were ever removed from his place because of sin, I can't remember the exact word, right? If he ever fell from his position, David Whitmer was the guy who was going to become the president of the church in his place. So when David Whitmer then ends up becoming the president of this newly organized Church of Christ, there's a reason for it. And the reason is what Joseph Smith said when he ordained him.
And we get that from Brigham Young. Just FYI, you've got it here on this slide. According to Brigham Young, Joseph Smith said he had ordained David Whitmer to be a, quote, leader or a prophet to this church, unquote, on the condition that, quote, he, meaning Joseph Smith Jr., did not live to God himself, unquote, which was interpreted by some dissidents to mean Whitmer should take over leadership if Joseph was deemed a fallen prophet.
Yeah.
All right, let's, do you have something with this one or is this me?
I think it's you.
Okay, Wikipedia, Succession Crisis, 15 March 1838, Zion High Council Minutes. David Whitmer had been ordained president of the High Council of Zion, and Joseph had blessed him on July 7th, 1834. So this is just documenting what we just said. This is the actual historical documentation that Joseph Smith, in fact, did say this to Whitmer, to be a leader or a prophet to this church, which was on the condition that he did not live to God himself.
Yeah, it's not just a late reminiscence from Brigham Young. This is from 1838 in the Zion High Council minutes of what happened in 1834 when Joseph ordained David Whitmer, and he said the exact same thing.
Yeah. So that's interesting. There's that. And in the fall of 1849, Martin Harris was in Rochester, New York, where a local paper described him as having wrote the Book of Mormon from Joe Smith's dictation. The latter reading the text from the golden plates by putting his face in a hat. The paper reported that Harris no longer goes with the Mormons, saying that they have gone to the devil just like other people. It noted he had left them 15 years ago when they assumed the appellation. Is that right? Am I saying that right? Appellation of Latter-day Saints.
The way you're saying it sounds like mountains, but I think it's correct. The appellation.
Okay, of Latter-day Saints, declaring instead that Latter-day Devils would be a more appropriate designation. The article added that Harris professes to have a mission from God, wandering to preach to all who will feed him, and that when refused, he shakes off the dust from his feet and leaves for more hospitable quarters. James Bay, who visited Harris, recorded that Harris affirmed he knew the Book of Mormon was true, for he saw the plates and knew for himself. Bay noted that they had quite a talk, with Harris criticizing the 12 apostles as wrong, though Bay told him he was wrong and he had better come up to the valley and see for himself. Reuben P. Harmon, another acquaintance, said Harris never claimed to have seen the plates with his natural eyes, only spiritual vision. So there's a third person saying that. Harris insisted it was impossible for the prophet Joseph to get up the Book of Mormon, for he could not spell the word Sarah.
Now that's interesting. This is interesting. Lehi's wife is Sarah, S-A-R-A, no H. Almost famous for no H among onomasticon enthusiasts of the Book of Mormon. But I've never heard before this somebody comment on it as a mark of Joseph Smith's ignorance.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. For he could not spell the word Sarah. He called Joseph a very illiterate man and believed that he, Harris, would be one of the 144,000. Sounds a little bit like Jehovah's Witnesses, would be one of the 144,000 mentioned in Revelation and would not die, but would be translated. You know what happens to every person who says or tells you that they were given in a patriarchal blessing that they would twinkle or be translated and would not die a natural death?
What happens to all of them or just a lot of them?
All of them.
What?
They all die a natural death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the kiss of death when you get that in your patriarchal blessing. You know you're not getting out of this life alive.
And the two documents that were mentioned, I think, in this was the North Star and the Naked Truths About Mormonism. So there's a edition of each of those shown there in the images.
Sorry, but it's interesting. How does he know that Joseph Smith doesn't know how to spell Sarah? Wasn't that his job? If the translation occurred the same way, I mean, you spell Sarah. I'm saying the word Sarah, Lehi and Sarah. I'll spell Lehi for you, but Sarah, you're on your own, Martin. I wonder what that suggests, if that story is true.
It suggests, at least in part, the tight translation model where every word is read back and spelled, and only after it's confirmed that it's spelled correctly do I move on.
Yeah. And maybe that was with names he did it, even with Sarah, which would seem obvious. I doubt he did the same thing with Sam, but who knows?
This is our final slide, and so I will just put in the live chat if somebody does want to come in really quick and ask a question, make a comment in the live chat. You'll see the StreamYard link to come into the studio. Martin joins the Brighamites in his 80s. Harris finally joined the Utah Church earlier in 1870. Mormon missionary Edward Stevenson found Harris still living in Kirtland, bearing a faithful testimony to the Book of Mormon. Stevenson reported Harris carrying the first edition Book of Mormon and offered to prove from the Bible that such a book's coming forth was prophesied.
Oh my gosh, Isaiah 29.
It goes right back to the Charles Anton visit, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Such a strange thing. It's you know, for believers, even when belief is absurd, they have these certain touchstones. You know, it doesn't matter. My ex-father-in-law said he knew President Monson was a prophet the moment President Monson wiggled his ears. And I thought, that's ridiculous.
Only prophets can wiggle their ears like that, Bill.
But believers have these moments where they're like, I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what data is out there. I know because on this moment, this happened, and it means the thing is true. And
what you're suggesting is all those allowances that I was talking about earlier that we make for Joseph Smith and other people.
Yep. He found a toothpick in a pile of straw.
It's amazing.
I know he's a prophet.
We make it for not just for people, but for church history. We make it for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
We make it for so many things. And then finally something happens and we go, wow, what an idiot I am. Why would I give 100 allowances for all this kind of crazy stuff, especially stuff that hurts other people, like polygamy and the whole 9 yards with that, taking people's money, uprooting them from where they live, taking them out to Utah or Nauvoo to prey upon the women that are brought with them. You know, it's not a victimless crime. And so when I finally came to the point, and it took a long time, when I finally woke up and said, I'm not going to make allowances for this person anymore, it was incredibly liberating.
Stevenson reported Harris carrying the first edition Book of Mormon and offering to prove from the Bible that such a book's coming forth was prophesied. Harris told Stevenson he felt it his duty to continue to lift up his voice in defense of the book. The apostle then encouraged Harris to join Brigham Young's Zion. Brigham personally raised funds. Young gave $25 himself to bring Harris west. In July 1870, Harris traveled by train to Utah. He spent his last years farming in Cache Valley, never reverting to straying or to RLDS lines. He told visitors, quote, he saw the plates handled them, and saw the angel, unquote, as he always had. Martin Harris died in Clarkston, Utah, 10th of July, 1875. He died an open believer in the Book of Mormon. And the question to me is, as you look at the collective life of Martin Harris, is his testimony worth, worth anything at all? Worth 2 nickels to rub together? I don't know. I don't know. I think there's enough here. I think there's plenty enough here that one could see plenty of reason to go, if you're going to believe this guy, then you got to believe a lot of things you wouldn't want to. And that doesn't make any sense at all. It'd be easier just to throw it all out.
Yeah, if you're on the jury and Martin Harris is the expert witness who's gotten up here to testify about all the stuff that happened, or even if he's just being a lay witness testifying about these things that he experienced, pretty much all this stuff that you've heard tonight is fodder for cross-examination. And if you put yourself on a jury and put on your third-party hat, you're not involved in this case. You're just looking at the evidence, looking at this guy's testimony, trying to evaluate it in light of all the evidence. And you hear that he believed all this other stuff. It makes you wonder, how much credence should I give to his testimony of the Book of Mormon and the angel and the vision and the plates?
Complete side note. And by the way, folks, if you want to come into the studio, you've got the link there. I'll put it in one more time. Otherwise, we'll end the show here shortly. But I did want to just note, I'm gonna put this picture back up. We have this story. Oliver Cowdery used divining rods, and there's a story about how that divining rod got eventually made into a cane and came into the possession of Brigham Young. And I've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 canes that Brigham Young owned. One is at the Daughters of Pioneer Museum here. Actually, I think they have 2 of them. Chris Bloxam, my friend, owns a Brigham Young cane. There are other ones that are at other museums in Salt Lake City, at the Church History Museum, and there's a few of the canes of Brigham Young. But I've seen up to now about 10. And every time I see one of those canes, I'm looking at it, trying to go, could that have been a divining rod? And the closest thing I've seen is this cane right here that Martin Harris is holding, which I think is at least interesting. It looks sort of like a snake head or something, but it looks like a stick with a twist in it that makes itself as a cane. Because none of the canes I've seen attributed to Brigham Young look like they could even possibly be a divining rod stick that's been carved or shaped into a cane.
Well, anyway. The divining rod cane is the one you want to be sure you grab when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're trying to find your way to the bathroom.
You want to get there as fast as possible, especially at my age.
Will basically lead you there.
Yeah. So there's that. That's the end of the show, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that anybody watching this, believer or otherwise, that you realize that the church gives you a very specific narrative about Martin Harris, and the apologists, when dealing with the problems, only want you to see certain things and want to obscure you from seeing others. And that tonight, if at the very least tonight filled in a more well-rounded examination of Martin Harris, that you learn things about him that you didn't know before, and that it helps you to make an informed decision about whether you give everything you have, your time, talents, and 10% of your gross income to the LDS Church, knowing that this, like in other instances, it's a lot more complex than what you think, what you're given, and that the church is not telling you the full story, and one would wonder why they don't. Anyway,
answer me in the comments how many of these stories you ever heard in church.
Yeah, please, in the live chat, in the comments down below. I'm going to guess that less than 1 or less is what you've heard. All right,
I heard the faithful version of the Charles Anton story.
Yeah, that doesn't count. You should go read what Charles Anton says about what happened. You should go read Stephen Burnett and not discount him as an apostate, because multiple people validated what he said and said it as well. Anything else?
I mean, when you think about it, and I know we've got to go, Bill.
Well, you're
but
good.
If you're just going to knee-jerk discount people because they're apostate, because they left the church, what you're doing is exactly what the church wants you to do. which is to say that as soon as you leave the church, you lose all credibility, right? Even though logic would tell us that a person would leave the church if they had been faithful, but found out things that made it so they couldn't continue to remain a member of the church in good conscience. So they leave the church. So what you're doing by that is you're cutting off that entire field of information, of legitimate information, just because somebody has left the church, when actually that could be, and likely will be, in many instances, the most fertile ground for finding out what the heck's going on and what the church isn't telling you.
It really is the only way. If the church weren't true, it's the only way you would learn it is to read the critical material and to consider it. All right, folks. Oh, go ahead.
That's why they say if you lived 2,000 years ago and you wanted to learn the truth about Jesus, wouldn't you go to the apostles and not to the Pharisees? And the answer is no. You would go to the Pharisees. You would listen to the apostles. You'd also go to the Pharisees, because that's the same thing as I decided long ago when I retired that argument from my apologetic quiver, was that, okay, so does that mean that if we look at Ford and Chevrolet, okay, so does that mean if you want to find out about Ford, the truth about Ford, you only go to the Ford dealership and you don't talk to the guy at the Chevy dealership? And I thought, wait, that doesn't make sense, because the guy at the Ford dealership is just trying to sell me a car. And that's when the light bulb went off.
Yeah. Listen to all sides. Consider the information and evidence on all sides, and then make an informed decision based on having a wide array of sources and information.
Yes. Now, this Friday is going to be 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Don't be late. It's going to be great. It's going to be so much fun. Bring your stories. I'll bring something. I'm going to be made up, and I've got it planned. I hope it works out okay, because it involves makeup and lots of it. So we'll see how it goes. And, what's the worst that could happen? It could look horrible, and that would be its own Halloween costume.
That's right. Friday, 8 p.m., folks, 8 p.m. Mountain Time, Mormonism After Dark, our costume Halloween special. And folks, please hit like and subscribe, and do us one big giant favor. Go over to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button, send $5 or $10 a month, something small. We really do need your donations to keep doing this far into the future. And you can make a big difference. Join the team today at mormonismlive.org. Good night, everybody. Good night, RFM, and see you all Friday night. Bye-bye.
See you then.